Alrighty, let's see here. This should work now. Alrighty. Looks like we're live. Let's wait and see how long it takes for everything to show up here. Oh. There I am. Okay. So, how's everybody doing? This was definitely more of a last minute. Didn't plan this one out in advance like I did with the previous live stream, which was Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday. So yeah, basically we're gonna, do episode number 2 of the keynote analysis here. Just waiting for some people to arrive here. Looks like we've got, it says 2, but I can see that's not the case because I can see a lot more messages than 2. So we'll wait for that to load up here and get some people in here. Now, as we're starting this, I do want to talk about one thing that was really frustrating with the last stream. If you guys follow me on Twitter at Luke Miani, or if you checked in the community tab, you probably saw that I had some issues with the last stream, and they were not the issues that I had expected, which was very strange. It's not uncommon for Apple to copyright claim videos with their keynotes in it. I did, 2 years ago, I did a video where we watched WWDC live, and they claimed it pretty much immediately. That's whatever. So I thought that was going to happen again, but as it turned out, one of the iPhone demos featured Steve Jobs playing some music, and that music got claimed, and they took down the video. So that was not ideal. But basically the plan here is to kind of just play it by ear. I'm going to try to mute anytime there's music in the keynotes so that we don't get claimed. And then we'll see if hopefully I'm able to keep the streams up in an unlisted playlist that will be available on the channel, and you'll be able to click it. So the videos won't show up like in the videos tab of my channel, but it should work in a playlist. Fingers crossed. Not sure if that'll actually happen, because Apple has also been known to copyright claim, take down videos, leave channels with copyright strikes. I really don't want to get a copyright strike. So if it seems like that's going to happen, I'm just going to take him down. But anyway, looks like we've got about 220 people here now. So I think we can go ahead and get started with the keynote for today. And that is going to be, drumroll please, the original MacBook Air. Now, the original MacBook Air has always fascinated me as, quite an interesting piece of tech. The MacBook Air is obviously now a really important part of the MacBook lineup. Most people buy the MacBook Air because it's the cheapest. People go for it all the time. But the original MacBook Air was not like that. It was a bit of a disaster, really. It was expensive. It didn't work very well. It broke, it was very slow, and it was not a very practical thing, the original 2008 Air. So what we're going to do today is sort of watch how that unfolded and kind of see how the first MacBook Air, which sucked really bad, ended up becoming Apple's most popular Mac. So we're up to about 250 here. Let's do it. Let us hop into the keynote. Let me go back this up here, because we actually start this keynote with one of the iconic Mac and PC ads, which, everyone knows. Everyone loves those things. Let me just make sure this is working here. Okay, there we go.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC.
Well, I can't believe 2007's over. PC was a great year, though, huh, buddy?
Not really.
What do you mean?
I came out with Vista. That didn't work very well. Some people are downgrading to XP. Meanwhile, you come out with your new operating system, Leopard, a new iMac, lots of new iPods. Oh, the iPhone. I almost forgot the iPhone.
Right.
It was a terrible year. But next year, looking forward to the future. 2008 is going to be the year of the PC.
That's a great attitude, PC. What do you got planned? What are you going to do?
I'm just going to copy everything you did in 2007.
Those ads were so iconic. Pretty funny that they were not very subtle back in the day. Apple doesn't do attack ads very much anymore. That was pretty much the end of when they did those in 2008. But, I mean, they were in a really good spot, you got to remember, in 2007-8 here. Like, think back to the Vista PCs that your family or your businesses had in 2008. They were pretty dismal. I don't remember there being any real exciting tech from the Windows side of stuff back then. But meanwhile, you had, the MacBook Pro, the MacBook Airs coming out, although that was a little iffy. The iPhone was coming out. We had iPods. There was a lot of stuff going on at Apple when a lot of the market was really struggling at the time. All right, let's continue.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to Macworld. Thank you. Welcome to Macworld 2008. We've got some great stuff for you. There's clearly something in the air today. But before we dive into all of that, I just wanted to take a moment and look back to 2007. 2007 was an extraordinary year for Apple. Some incredible new products, the amazing new iMac, the awesome new iPods,
that's true, the aluminum
and
iMac.
Of course the revolutionary iPhone. On top of that, Leopard and all of the other great software we shipped in 2007. It was an extraordinary year for Apple, and I want to just take a moment and say thank you. We had tremendous support by all of our customers, and we really, really appreciate it. So thank you for an extraordinary 2007. Thank you.
One of the things that's crazy about this is you got to remember Steve Jobs came back to Apple, I'm pretty confident, 1997. I don't know exactly when that year, but I'm pretty sure he came back in 97. And think of, we're talking about a little bit over 10 years at this point that Steve Jobs had been back at Apple. And think of the amount, just like the sheer quantity of products and innovation that happened in those 10 years. So you got 1998, original iMac, game changer. You've got the iPod in 2001, the PowerBook Titanium, which was, I believe, also 2001. The PowerBook 12, 15, and 17, that was like 2003. Then the original Mac Mini in 2005. There was the floating screen iMac, the G4 in 2002. That was crazy. Then they had the 2006 was switching to Intel, MacBook Pro, Mac Pro. And then you had the iBook G3, the clamshell one. Someone just brought that up. That was back in 1999. Another crazy product. That's a ton of stuff. And then the iPhone and iPods of all shapes and sizes. That's in 10 years. That is absolutely insane.
So I've got 4 things I'd like to talk about with you today. So let's get started. The first one is Leopard. I'm thrilled to report that we have delivered over 5 million copies of Leopard in the first 90 days.
This was back when they still charged for OSs.
Unbelievable.
A lot of them on DVD.
It is the most successful release of Mac OS X ever. And what this has resulted in is almost 20% of the Mac OS X installed base is now upgraded to Leopard. This is unprecedented in the first 90 days for both us and, of course, the industry. So we're really thrilled by this. And the press has been very kind, too. It's been a critical success as well as a commercial success. In my view...
All right, looks like they have an ad for their time
capsule. I'd love
capsule.
to run it for you now.
Hello, Mac.
What's with all of the U's?
Oh, yeah, this is my new backup feature, Time Machine.
Oh.
It automatically makes copies of me every hour. So if I accidentally delete a file, I can always find it. Exactly. Plus, it's part of Leopard, so it comes on every Mac.
I have to say, Mac, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thanks, PC. Yeah, thanks, PC. Oh, thanks, PC. Thanks, PC. Yeah, thanks, PC.
Okay,
Yeah, thanks,
you're
PC.
welcome, all of you. You don't have to go down the whole line.
Another great, like the way that they sort of personified these dynamics through those ads were so funny. They had little Neo from the Matrix looking guy who was nice, but also, let's be honest, super smug. So it is, and that was like a really effective ad campaign as well. Like how long did they run those ads from? It was like 2006 to 8, something like that. They had a ton of them. And they did a great job of sort of visually explaining features instead of just going, hey, this is our new time capsule function and it makes backups, right? That's basically what a time capsule is. It's just a chronological backup. But because they put on this like crazy, well, first of all, they had the really intuitive UI where you could kind of like go through all the different windows in time. I miss that UI. They should bring that back. And that creative way of explaining it, it sort of makes it seem like more of an exciting feature than it really is. Apple's always been really good at that. I mean, have you seen Memojis? They're not that cool. I don't know anyone who unironically uses Memojis, except for my mom, but that doesn't really count. So, yeah.
So that's Time Capsule, a perfect companion to Leopard, and that's the first thing I wanted to share with you this morning. So number two is about the iPhone. I've got some great news for you. Now, today happens to be exactly the 200th day since the iPhone went on sale. Right? iPhone's been shipping for exactly 200 days today, and I'm extraordinarily pleased to report that we have sold 4 million iPhones to date.
Pretty impressive for a first-gen product.
If you divide 4 million by 200 days, that's 20,000 iPhones every day on average. So we're really pleased with this. Now, what does this mean in terms of the overall market? Well, let's take a look at the US smartphone market share that the iPhone has achieved. Now, this is data from Gartner, and the most recent data we can get is really just for the third count.
It's so funny to see the market share: RIM, Apple, Palm, Motorola, Nokia, and other. If you look at that today, Nokia, pretty much gone. Motorola, still around, but not really very much. Palm, gone. RIM, gone. Apple's definitely not leading market share, but it's kind of crazy to see that we're talking about, what is this, January 2008, so 12 years ago. This is a completely, think of how many brands are right here in other that are now, ahead of Apple in terms of market share. Samsung, for example. It's crazy. LG, Samsung, HTC for a while, although they kind of went away. It's pretty funny to see all of these kings of the smartphone or the world phone, cell phone market that have not really stuck around.
Quarter ending in September. So this is iPhone's first quarter of shipment ever. And so the market share in the US, RIM had the highest market share with 39%, right? They do a great job, highest market share. Next was the iPhone. Its first quarter shipping, it garnered 19.5% market share. Now let's look at number 3, 4, and 5. Palm with 9.8%, Motorola with 7.4%, and Nokia with 1.3%. And then other, the category with everybody else in it, 20.2%. So the iPhone, in its first 90 days of shipping, garnered almost a 20% market share of the US smartphone market. What's equally interesting to this is if you take number 3, 4, and 5, Palm, Motorola, and Nokia together, and you add up their market shares, it was 20.3.
That is pretty funny. I just looked up smartphone market share by OS, and Apple currently has about 15%. So, now, granted, that's not, a lot of people say, ooh, well, look at that, Apple's failing. Oh my gosh, they're going to go out of business. Obviously, that's not the case. There's a lot of phones out there. But at least initially, you have to keep in mind when you're looking at smartphone market share, the iPhone didn't have a lot of competition for the early days. So as time has gone on, there's a lot more competition. But let's also not forget that iPhones sell a lot more, even though their market share is less. So it's a little bit misleading. But it is pretty funny to see that their first quarter market share, when the iPhone was announced, is higher than their current market share.
We equaled them in the first 90 days of shipment. And we just about equaled other, which is everybody else put together, in our first quarter. And when the numbers come out for the December quarter, we think we're going to have done even better. So this is our first 90 days, 4 million iPhones to date.
So we have some iPhone updates. We don't need to go over all of that stuff because they had basically just worked on ironing out some of the things that didn't really work initially. So they were shipping, what were they shipping here? Is that the iPhone 2G? I don't remember. I think they might have done a minor update. I know that they dropped the price. Oh no, this might be, what is this? iPhone OS 2. Oof, I'm going to be embarrassed if I'm wrong. Someone's going to correct me. Okay, let's skip ahead here and try to find, okay, so then we had iTunes stuff. No one cares about iTunes stuff. Apple TV stuff. Oh, look at that. Good old days. I think that's the Apple TV stuff. Let's skip ahead and find the MacBook Air, because that's what we're all here for, isn't it? And we'll try not to have any scenes from a movie or any sort of music on the stream, because then this will get taken down. So let's skip very much ahead. Wow. A lot of this keynote is dedicated to iTunes. Here we go.
My pleasure to introduce to you the chairman and CEO of 20th Century Fox.
Oh, good grief. No one wants to hear from you. Okay, here we go. Now we're talking.
There's something in the air.
Gotta save the big stuff for the end.
What is it? Well, as you know, Apple makes the best notebooks on the planet. The MacBook and the MacBook Pro. These are the standards in the industry by which competitive products are judged. Well, today, we're introducing a third kind of notebook. It's called the MacBook Air.
Notice where they put it. Because that's not, in 2015 when the MacBook made a comeback, that was not the same order. But the order that things are in here is very important.
Now, what is the MacBook Air? In a sentence, it's the world's thinnest notebook. So,
Just got that one right off.
what does that mean? Well, we went out and looked at all the thin notebooks out there. Most people think of these, the Sony TZ series. They're good notebooks, and they're thin. Right? This is what they look like. Side view there. We looked at all of them out there and kind of tried to distill the best of the breed of all of them. And
God, it's... Do you guys remember how ugly laptops were in 2008? Oh my God, it was ridiculous. So one thing that you got to remember for context of the PC, the laptop market at this time, 2008 was like 2007 to 2009, right? So we're right in the thick of it, was peak netbook territory. Do you guys remember netbooks? I remember netbooks. I had a netbook. Holy moly, those things. I mean, they were crazy. They were everywhere. And they were so terrible. And it was amazing how many people bought things that were so terrible and then stopped using them so quickly. Like, it was a trend that started in like the end of 2007 and people were like, whoa, awesome. And then by like mid 2009, literally less than 24 months, people were like, nah, don't want them. So basically the idea behind the netbook was part of the late 2000s craze of let's miniaturize everything. We want a mini screen in our pockets. That's our smartphone. We want to miniaturize our laptops. And the problem was, we're talking 2008 technology here. That was very, very limited. Now, I'm going to say the name of one of the most hated processors ever. The Intel Atom. Yeah. That's what those things ran on. We're talking 10, 11-inch screens, Intel Atom single-core processors, usually less than a gigabyte of RAM, and really terrible 60 gigabyte mechanical hard drives. That's pretty much what you were looking at when you were buying a netbook with those little miniature keyboards. They were abysmal, but they were all over the place. And so the MacBook Air was sort of like, well, what if we took the idea of a netbook, right? Portability being the main goal, and we try to not sacrifice those things. Now, as we go along here, we'll talk about whether they achieved that or not, but you can't deny that the idea, which is basically an ultrabook, was a good one.
You know, they generally weigh about 3 pounds. They're, in this case, in the Sony's case, they're about 0.8 inches to 1.2 inches thin. They're wedge shape. This is quite representative. They compromise, though, to get the weight down on things like the display. They have an 11 or 12-inch display, most of them an 11. They also compromise on the keyboard. Instead of putting full-size keyboards in, they make miniature keyboards.
They're always terrible.
And they don't run them as fast as they could because their thermal envelopes don't support faster processors.
Now, that sentence that he just said was so ironic. It's almost laughable looking back at how ironic that was. But basically, the netbooks were the really low end of the market. They were usually like $500 at the time, which works out to around $650 in today's money, which can actually get you a really decent laptop nowadays. But back then, even in the context of 2007-8, they were pretty limited. But what they're targeting here, as you would expect with Apple, whenever they pitch their products, they have a very specific thing that they like to compare it to. Whether that's fair or not is, up for debate. Sometimes it's not, but they're kind of going for the thin and light, small, portable, but not necessarily netbook laptop. Because obviously Apple's not going to be bothering themselves to complete with a $500 netbook. That's beneath the dignity of Apple Computer. But that's sort of where they're coming from here, to give you some context.
So we looked at this and we said, what do we like and what do we think is a compromise here? We think the weight's a good target, 3 pounds. But we think there's too much compromising to get there.
Although, could you imagine a 12-inch laptop today weighing 3 pounds? That's kind of crazy. A MacBook Pro weighs like 4.2, something like that. A 13-inch MacBook Pro is under 3 pounds. So it's pretty funny that 11-inch laptops were 3 pounds in 2008. It's crazy how far things have come.
Too much compromising on thickness, too much compromising on less than a full-size display.
Agreed.
Less than a full-size keyboard.
Very much agreed.
And we think you could put even more performance in one of these products.
Ironic.
So, let's take a look at the thinness first. This is that Sony product. Again, one of the best in the field. 1.2 inches down to 0.8 inches. This is the MacBook Air.
That was like crazy at the time. You don't get games like that today. That's crazy.
0.76 inches down to an unprecedented 0.16 inches. Now, I want to point something out here. The thickest part of the MacBook Air is still thinner than the thinnest part of the TZ series. Okay? We're talking thin here.
This thing was really, really thin at the time.
So, it's so thin, it even fits inside one of these envelopes that we've all seen floating around the office.
There it is, the classic envelope.
And so let me go ahead and show it to you now.
That as much controversy as there was with the original MacBook Air, that was a really iconic moment.
Let me take it out here.
Listen to that audience.
This is the new MacBook Air, and you can get a feel for how thin it is. Yeah, there it is. Look at this.
one of the things that's interesting about the original MacBook Air is this was where Johnny Ive really cut his teeth on tapering designs around. So previously, Apple had a lot of like very squared off designs. The MacBook Pro, which was based on the PowerBook, and a lot of the laptops were very boxy. Even the unibody MacBook Pro, which hadn't come out yet, by the way, let's not forget, this is pre-unibody MacBook of any sort, right? This sort of set the design trend for those, but even those were still, slab-sided, flat on top, a little bit of curving around the sides, but not super major. The entire MacBook Air is basically a teardrop, right? The thickest point is somewhere in the middle on the bottom of this thing. So this was where Johnny Ive really went crazy with it. And there were some compromises that had to be made to get that, because what you don't get, even nowadays on a MacBook Air or any MacBook, is a tapered side. But as you can see here, the side is like, the front is all super thin and tapered, but the side is that same thickness as well, because they wanted it to be all the way around, which led to some other interesting compromises and issues. So this was definitely a design over function situation.
All right. Amazing product here. Full-size keyboard, full-size display. And this is what it looks like. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, look at that. You can see how it's tapered all the way around the sides. And that meant that you had this little door here for the ports. We'll talk about that more in a little bit, but the infamous port door was not well received.
So, let's go explore this in more detail. So again, it fits inside one of these envelopes. It's that small. This is what it looks like. Isn't that incredible? It's the world's thinnest notebook.
One of the things that I don't like about the design of the original MacBook Air, and I'm not sure if this is picking up here, but the taper on the top does not match on the bottom. That has always really bothered me about this. Even when this came out, I was like, what the heck is that? Look at this. See how the bottom, it's kind of hard to see because it's not a very high quality recording here, but the bottom tapers and it stops tapering around the feet. It levels out a little bit here, but the lid stops tapering right over here. It goes up and then it's pretty much flat on top. So you get this weird top-heavy look. It's very bizarre. I was not a fan of that aspect. I think overall, especially for the time, it's a very attractive notebook, but that tapering just confused me.
You open it up. It's got a magnetic latch, so there's no hooks or things to catch on your clothing.
That was another thing that
and
was
it's got
very popular
a
going forward.
full-size 13.3-inch widescreen display. And the display is gorgeous. It's an LED backlit display. And not only does that save power, and not only does that give a really bright display, but it's instant on the minute you open it. On top of the display is a built-in iSight camera for video conferencing right out of the box. And you flip it down, there is a full-size keyboard. This is perhaps the best notebook keyboard we've ever shipped.
That was a fact. What he just said was a fact. That was the first, if you remember.
Phenomenal keyboard. And it's full
phenomenal
size.
keyboard. Let's get a shot of that keyboard.
With the
back up
ambient
here.
light.
Here we go. This is the first time that we saw everyone's favorite Apple keyboard, right? Before that, we had the chiclet keyboard on the white plastic MacBook that was similar but not quite the same level. And then the MacBook Pros back then, you have to remember, had the silver keycaps. So this and those were all right, but if you go back and type on one of those original MacBook Pro pre-unibody keyboards, they're pretty soft. They're pretty mushy. But this right here, this was the first with like the silver on black backlit keyboard that was used up until 2015, 16, forget about that. And then now is kind of making a comeback. So that was one of the most true statements that you could possibly hear in an Apple keynote. The best keyboard we've ever made. Fact.
Sensor, it's also backlit.
backlit on a really thin laptop was pretty impressive.
We've got a very generous trackpad.
This is the
is
first time you
great.
see multi-touch on a trackpad.
We've also built in multi-touch gesture support. Now, as you know, our current notebooks have some gestures built in. We've taken that even further. When you go to Preferences in the MacBook Air, you'll actually get to turn on all sorts of other types of gestures, and there's actually videos in there to show you what they are. So let me run through them with you now. You can double tap, and instead of moving the cursor around, you can move a whole window around, right? Just a nice time saver. So that's great. Here's another one. When you're in a photo, a large photo, you want to pan around. You can pan around with just 2 fingers like this. Another nice time saver. You want to rotate a photo. This works in iPhoto and all the other photo apps. Just rotate like this. Again, we've taken some of these things we learned in the iPhone, and now we're putting them in our notebook computers.
You may also notice here that so this is a bit of an unusual hybrid trackpad for Apple. So this was back when the MacBook and the MacBook Pro had basically like the track space that was up here, and then they had like the big one button, right? You all remember that one probably. Great. It worked well at the time, but if you've ever used anything newer, which you probably have, this was definitely a step in the right direction. But it's not quite the multi-touch glass trackpad that we're all used to, because you can see we still have the click button. So this surface here is still just for tracking. It doesn't move. It doesn't click. The button is still down here. And it wasn't until later in 2008 with the unibody MacBook Pro that we actually got the whole trackpad is a button style that has been just the best. In fact, I think I can't remember if the surface was glass or plastic, but I did a review on the original MacBook Air about 2 years ago. The tracking surface is definitely worse. Like even in 2008 unibody MacBook Pro, being 12 years old, still has a great trackpad by modern standards. Easily a great trackpad. This was kind of a mix between the two.
Here's another one. If you want to go between photographs, next photo, just take 3 fingers and pan right. Previous photo, pan left. And you want to zoom, you can pinch in and out. Right? Isn't that great?
So we take all this stuff for granted now. This is even before, swiping in for apps, swiping between desktops, before all of that.
Multi-touch gestures. Pretty amazing. And again, you can see how beautiful and thin this product is. Now, how did we fit a Mac in here?
They almost did.
I'm still stunned that our engineering team could pull this off. Well, let's look at the bottom. Take off the bottom, and there's 3 things in here.
Now the problems
battery,
begin.
hard disk, and the electronics. On the hard disk, we went to 1.8-inch hard drives. We've shipped tens of millions.
This was the worst part. Well, actually, I don't even know if this would be the worst part, but this was one of the really big sticking points for the MacBook Air. Why the heck are we getting an iPod hard drive in a MacBook Air, in a MacBook of any sort, really? Because the iPod hard drive is meant for storing and playing music. That's a simple enough task. You don't need a ton of super fast storage, especially at the time, 60 gigabytes, 80 gigabytes in an iPod was normal. People were fine having a hard drive. But when you run a full operating system on an iPod hard drive, it is going to be a disaster. You have to remember we're talking about, what were they? It was like 4,200 RPM, 4,500 RPM drives. That's unbelievable. Right? Like we think even 5 or 6 years ago, a 5,400 RPM hard drive was slow. Even in like 2013, people were like, yeah, if you can afford SSD, that's probably the way to go. 5,400 RPM is pretty slow. Could you imagine using a hard drive that was 4,500 RPM. These things were unbelievably slow. I don't know why in the world I mean, the only reason they did this is because they wanted to hit that thickness target, right? And they had to use a small little hard drive, and SSDs were still pretty expensive. But like, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it was only like, what was it, 80 gigabytes, something like that?
These and iPods, we know them well, and they're great. And so
great
the
for
MacBook
iPods.
Air ships with an 80 gigabyte hard disk as standard, and there's an option of a 64 gigabyte solid state disk.
The SSDs, you have to remember that we're still talking about an old SSD. So that was not much faster than a 7,200 RPM hard drive. So there wasn't really a fast flash storage like there is today. You know, the all-flash architecture, which is sort of the famous line from the 2012 Retina MacBook Pro keynote, which came 4 years after this. But like, we're talking about 80 gigabytes at 4,500 RPM. It hurts. It hurts. I won't reveal what the price is. You might remember what the price was, but just 80 gigabytes iPod hard drive. I don't know what they were thinking.
If you'd like it. These are a little pricey, but they are fast. But the real magic
They were
is
really
in the
expensive
electronics.
too. It was like 500
This
bucks or
is a
something.
complete Mac on a board. Let's take off the cooling system. That's a complete Mac on this board. And you can think, well, okay, what's so special about that? Well, this is how big the board is. It's really tiny. And to fit an entire Mac on this thing
4,200 RPM.
was an
You're right,
amazing
42.
feat of engineering.
Really slow.
And we didn't compromise on performance.
Yes, you did. You did. So it wasn't, you know, credit where credit's due. In 2008, having a board that small was impressive. But it was sort of in the same way that the Retina MacBook had an impressively small board, where the board was small and it was impressive that it was small, but that doesn't mean that it was good. See, Apple has a tendency to conflate a technological achievement with being good, which is not necessarily the case. The butterfly keyboard was a technological achievement, but it was not good. In the same way that shrinking down a Mac to this small board was an achievement, but it was not necessarily a positive one, especially when we're talking about the Core 2 Duo generation. So this had a Merom CPU, Merom Core 2 Duo. Let me find out what the processing size was for that. I think they were like 40 nanometer, something like that. 45 nanometer architecture. So that's, you know, obviously quite substantial compared to a modern CPU. We're on 10 nanometers right now. Apple's already got 7 nanometer in the A13, right? And even just a couple of years later, we're looking at 22 nanometers. So to shrink down a 45 nanometer Core 2 Duo is not a really good idea. And we're about to see what exactly they did.
MacBook Air uses the Intel Core 2 Duo. This is a really speedy processor. It's what we use in all of our other notebooks and our iMacs. 1.6 gigahertz standard, and there's an option to go to 1.8 gigahertz if you want. Now, we've got a great relationship with Intel. And both companies are engineering driven, and they both love to challenge each other. And Intel's got enormous amounts of technology. And so when we were...
Someone pointed out the CPU for this original one was... so it's Merom, which is 65 millimeters, and then there was Penryn, which was like really, really soon after, that was 45. So I think this particular one, I can't remember. I think it was the 65. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Not 100% sure. I know that the Air got updated pretty quickly at the end of 2008, and I think those used a 45 nanometer process. So I think that's what happened.
Building this product, we asked them to consider something. This is their amazing Core 2 Duo chip, right? It's a screamer.
It's a
We said
screamer.
we want that chip in this product, but we need to go to smaller packaging. The same die on a smaller package. It sounds easy, it's not. They spent invested a lot of engineering to create this for us. This is the same chip in a package that is 60% smaller. And it's one of the reasons we could build MacBook Air.
It's also one of the reasons why MacBook Air sucked. Because the package was smaller and that's all fine, but it's still the same die, as he just said, and they had way less cooling. So that became a significant... If you thought that the 2018 Core i9 throttling was bad, whew, you ain't seen nothing yet.
And so I'd like to say thank you to Intel. And it's my pleasure to invite the CEO of Intel, Paul Otellini, on stage. I'd like to give him a round of applause.
Hi, Steve. Pleasure. You know, Steve, about a year ago, you challenged us to try and get the world's best microprocessor into this impossibly thin machine. I brought one with us today. When we started this project, we didn't think it was possible. The product that we ended up building for you is about the width of a dime. It's as thick as a nickel. It has 400 million really fast, really power-efficient transistors on it, and it's state-of-the-art. And I think just working with you and your team to produce these wonderful devices has been a challenge. There are times when we sweated over it, but at the end of the day, we did what we do best together, which is innovate.
Yep.
And I want to thank you and your team for allowing us the opportunity
They
to
didn't so much
with you.
innovate as they
Let me give you this as a
sacrificed.
souvenir.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Key distinction there.
Woo! This is awesome technology. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Intel. So, that's the electronics. That's how we fit a Mac inside the world's thinnest notebook. So let's take a look at some of the other features. On one of the sides, we've got a MagSafe connector.
The MagSafe connector on the original MacBook Air was at an angle. I know you're thinking, what the heck? Why would it be at an angle? So that was because the whole design was tapered. It had to be. So there's a very awkward spot for it to be, and that was why you may remember the original MagSafe, the white plastic MagSafe connectors were sort of the T design, where it was just kind of the cord came out of the back and it plugged straight in. This was where the barrel design started to come into play because they needed to redesign MagSafe specifically for the MacBook Air, and they kind of stuck with that through the duration of MagSafe 1. Ooh, example. I'm back with a barrel MagSafe port. Plug, whatever. This is why they had to do it. The old ones had the charger coming out back here behind that. But obviously, with it at an angle like that, you can't get it on the desk. It won't fit. So that's why they had to do this. Not to say that that's a bad thing. Personally, I prefer the T MagSafe because these ones were annoying if you had to like shift your laptop around. You often had to like unplug and replug it. And if it was plugged in, because it was all the chargers on the left side, right? So if you're plugged in on the left, the cord was always bent like this. And it was a really awkward way. And then you would end up where, because you're moving the top of the MagSafe port around all the time, this part right here where it connects would get frayed, and it was not really the best in terms of longevity. So that was a minor issue, but that, if you're wondering why Apple switched to this design, it's because of the MacBook Air. So you can thank that for that.
We've got a smaller 45-watt power adapter that also comes with the MacBook Air. On the other side, we've got a flip-down door that exposes USB 2 port, a micro DVI connector with digital and analog video, and a headphone jack.
That was not a lot
And
of
maybe
I/O.
most-
Did you see that? Remember in 2015 when they went to USB-C port, one USB-C port? This was a time where it was not uncommon to have like 15 or 16 ports on your standard business laptop. You'd have like a couple of USBs, Ethernet. Sometimes they would have a modem, S-Video, VGA. Maybe some higher end ones had HDMI. You had SD card, you had compact flash, you had a DVD player. There were so many ports that you would find on these laptops at the time. And so to have headphone jack, USB, and DVI, that was crazy. That was like the USB-C of the time in terms of lacking I/O.
Importantly, we've built in the most advanced wireless networking technology, 802.11n, right into MacBook Air, along with Bluetooth 2.1 plus EDR. So the latest and greatest in wireless technology. The MacBook Air was built to be a wireless machine. Now, no matter how hard you look, one thing you're not going to find in a MacBook Air is an optical
ports.
drive. If you really want one, we've built one. You can buy this accessory that was made for the MacBook Air. It's powered off the USB port of the MacBook Air, and it costs just $99, and it's very compact. You can take
Imagine $100 to add back the thing that they took off. At the time, that was kind of controversial. Obviously, now people don't really blink an eye when there's no DVD drive on a computer. You only really find them anymore on low-end stuff in the first place. But in 2008, that was like ditching the USB Type A port. You know, DVDs were still at their height. So that's one thing about Apple. They predict trends, right? They predicted that, you know, we would want higher resolution displays with the Retina. They predicted all-flash architecture. They were very early on that. They predicted MP3 players. They've done a lot of stuff where they've pushed trends. But the downside to that is people aren't always ready for it. In 2016, we were not ready to have USB-C only on a MacBook Pro. In 2008, we weren't necessarily ready to not have a DVD player on a laptop. That's changed since then, obviously, and people aren't mad about it anymore, but Apple definitely gets a head start on modernization.
with you wherever you go with your MacBook Air. But you know what? We don't think most users are going to miss the optical drive. We don't think they're going to need an optical drive.
Well,
because
later
again,
they won't.
the MacBook Air was built to be a wireless machine. So what do we normally do with optical drives? We play movies, right? We install software. We make backups. And we burn music CDs sometimes, for our cars usually.
Not
Well, guess
wrong.
what? We have a much better way to get movies onto our computers now. We can wirelessly rent them from iTunes Movie Rentals right on our MacBook Air. We have a much better way than burning CDs for our car. Most of us have iPods in our cars now.
As with everything Apple, we don't need to do that anymore because we have the new future tech. Yeah, but it's also more expensive. Like, an iPod is a lot more expensive than a CD player. And there were a lot of people that still had CD players.
For making backups, we now have Time Machine and Time Capsule to
Also more expensive than a
wirelessly
CD.
back up our notebooks. What about installing software? Well, we're going to do that wirelessly too. We've innovated in a way only Apple can to give a comprehensive solution to this problem. We have a new feature on MacBook Air built right into the operating system called Remote Disk. And so when you go to the Finder in MacBook Air, you will see in the left-hand column something called Remote Disk. And Remote Disk, when you click on it, will show you all those Macs or PCs in your vicinity that have some special software loaded on them that comes on the disk of MacBook Air, Mac version and a Windows version. And you can pick one of those machines and ask to borrow its optical drive. And when you do, that machine will get a request. They can accept it. That's what it looks like on Windows. And so once they've accepted it, you see what's in their optical drive. And you have Mac installer disks inside
was
a
sort of
Windows PC.
almost a precursor to iCloud device sharing, iCloud Drive, AirDrop. So that was definitely a useful technology, but you can definitely tell that it was a bit of a patch, an appeasement, because Apple at this point, they predict technology pretty well. I don't think that getting rid of the DVD drive in the long run ended up being a bad decision at all, but they definitely have to come up with ways to hold people's attention while they are making those transitions. People had iPods and stuff, and CDs were declining, but they still had them, they still needed them. So that was definitely a way to kind of shoehorn some old technology in. And let's not forget, you're still relying on a CD drive. You just need another computer to do it.
PC can read a Mac disk with this special software and send it wirelessly over to your MacBook Air, and you click on it, and it's just as if you had a local optical drive.
Another thing that's really interesting is that this kind of started, Apple has really done a good job in sort of wireless connectivity amongst computers. And that wasn't something that was super out there in 2008 or even a couple of years later. Like today, we kind of think of, you have wireless backups, or you get a new iPhone and you hold your old one next to it and it copies the data. You have wireless backups. You have iCloud Drive that syncs across multiple computers. You've got AirDrop from one device to another, continuity, handoff. All of this stuff stems from this wireless idea. Someone was mentioning that Apple has always done a good job of innovating in the wireless way, which doesn't get as much attention as a physical device, but man, was that stuff kind of monumental. The ability, and they still lead the way in that today. Let's not make any mistake here. AirDrop, iMessage, iCloud, handoff, continuity, all that stuff works really seamlessly. And Sidecar, that's another one, newer one. That's all kind of from that same design philosophy of just like, well, what if everything just worked together and you didn't have to plug stuff in or make backups or plug in hard drives? What if it just worked?
And you can install your software. It's amazing.
That was a good idea.
So, remote disk, that's how we're going to install software. Wirelessly. We go from this to this. And we don't think users are going to miss that.
A couple years later,
so
they definitely
MacBook
did
Air,
that.
this amazing notebook. We also didn't want to compromise on battery life. And so MacBook Air, when you're doing email, you're browsing the web, wireless networking's turned on, 5 hours of battery life in that tiny little portable. A lot of the other ultra-thin notebooks get an hour and a half of battery life. This is phenomenal battery life without having to put a big, giant external battery on it like some of them do.
Oh God, do you remember those batteries that stuck out the side and like propped up the laptop? Oh my gosh. There's some things that you just wonder, like, why, from a design perspective, why did we ever think that was a good idea? Remember those PCs that used to have the media buttons on them, like the Vista laptops that had like the little media center control hard keys on them? They were like home, press play, and it would open up Windows movie player or something or whatever. God, those things were useless, and they like were mapped so badly. Oh, those were the sort of gimmicks and stuff that Apple just never bought into.
So, what are the
I'm glad
features?
they didn't, because they didn't last.
3 pounds. An unprecedented 0.16 to 0.76 inch thickness. A 13.3 inch full-size display. A full-size keyboard. A backlit keyboard. Multi-touch gestures on a very spacious trackpad. EyeSight camera built in for out-of-the-box video conferencing and horsing around with photo booth. 1.6 gigahertz Core 2 Duo as standard. 2 gigabytes of memory standard. An 80 gig hard drive standard.
Definitely a
with
little
an option to go to a 64 gigabyte solid state drive.
Way too expensive for that.
802.11n Wi-Fi standard. Bluetooth 2.1 EDR standard. And of course our MagSafe connector. And all of these features and more in the thinnest notebook in the world.
With the worst
and we are
tapering in the
pricing
world.
this notebook at
Here it
just
comes.
$17.99.
$1,800, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do a quick inflation calculation on that. So we're looking at, this was January 2008. Well, I'll put in $17.99 just to be clear. $2,142.30 in today's money. That's how much the original MacBook Air cost. That is unbelievable. Now, obviously, today you look at 2 gigabytes of RAM, blah, blah, blah. You know, you can't kind of look at this through a modern lens because obviously a Core 2 Duo, 2 gigs of RAM, and an 80 gigabyte hard drive is pretty bad by today's standards, especially for $2,100. But even in 2008, for $2,000, that was crazy. And keep in mind that the 64 gigabyte SSD option, if you wanted to go, well, this iPod hard drive is pretty slow. Let's get some faster storage. You're losing storage space going from 80 to 64, and it cost the equivalent of like over $600 today. This thing was so expensive. And it was, I don't know, dude, it was so crazy. Like, this is such a first-gen product, and it was really clear, but man, was this thing pricey.
And we commence shipping MacBook Airs in just 2 weeks. We're starting to take orders today. Pre-order on the online store if you'd like. We'll be shipping in 2 weeks. So, this is what the shipping box looks like. So the thinnest notebook in the world, it's just amazing. And we made an ad that we're going to start running. If you'd like, I'll show it to you. You want to see it? Okay. Go ahead and run the ad.
Muted. Oh, yep, muting that. I will 100% get claimed for that. It's like the I'm a new soul in this very strange world. You know that song. Everyone knows this ad. This is a really, really iconic ad. Yeah, honestly, I don't know. It still looks pretty good. I won't lie. You know, for 2008, if you look at the competition, it's a pretty attractive notebook. Bezels are a bit thick, but, you know, it's 2008. Got to cut it some slack. All right, there we go. Copyright strike aborted.
So, MacBook Air. I wanted to cover one other side of MacBook Air. We're going to do this for our major product introductions going forward. That is some of the progress we've made towards our environmental initiatives on these products. So there's a few things we've done. Number one, the MacBook Air is enclosed in a fully aluminum case, which is fully recyclable. Matter of fact, it's a highly desirable material.
So we've kind of gotten through the bulk of the announcement here. So let's unpack why exactly the original MacBook Air kind of sucked. So we talked about that, and, you know, there were some features that were really, really useful. The design and sort of the look of it set the tone for laptops, MacBooks going forward. Great design, great look. The keyboard, fantastic. This was also the introduction, they didn't really talk about it in this keynote, of the unibody enclosure. Having everything screwed into a single unified design. That is undoubtedly a revolutionary and hugely impactful design process, right? We're using that. Pretty much every laptop has, or at least any high-end, decently well-built laptop is a unibody design these days. So that was revolutionary. The sort of look of the thin and light ultrabooky MacBook Air, that kind of set the trend for other ultrabooks and future MacBook Airs. But what really, really stunk about this MacBook Air was the value. $1,800, you were getting a pretty much nerfed down Core 2 Duo that couldn't run anything. The heat sink on that computer was microscopic. It was basically a piece of tinfoil that was stuck onto the CPU. And it also had to cool the chipset. It had GMA graphics that were absolutely terrible. And it overheated on a dime. It's worse in terms of cooling than any MacBook that has ever existed, pretty much. Even the fanless MacBook was cooled better than this. Basically what happened was when you would run any sort of demanding application, by which I mean a couple of tabs in Safari, it would throttle down to 1 core. 1 core. You're spending $2,000 in today's money, and it was throttling to 1 core. So, you're running, you have a Core 2 Duo, but you only have those dual cores when you're not doing anything. As soon as you try to do something on it, you're on a 1 core, basically Intel Atom. It was abysmal. There were also issues with the port door. The port door, well, first of all, it was super limited. Didn't have a lot of ports in the door. And second of all, it was such a small gap, and because it wasn't flush with the side of the laptop, you couldn't fit things in there. If you had a thick USB drive, like a flash drive or something like that, chances are it probably didn't plug in. Same with headphones. You needed like the really slim headphones with really minimal enclosures like you would get on conveniently all the stuff Apple sold, but not the stuff everybody else has. And so that wasn't great. And then you also had issues with the display hinges, because this was when they were sort of integrating antennas into the display hinge in a different way, and it did not go well. The hinges got super loose, and the displays would get super duper wobbly. They also had issues with the display cables, where they would break, in addition to the overheating. The hard drives were slow as heck, 4,200 RPM running a full OS on that. Could you imagine? Oh my gosh. And even if you're talking about 2008, right, maybe you could scrape by with a 4,200 RPM hard drive. But if you're planning on keeping a computer for 4 years or so, right, could you imagine using a 4,200 RPM hard drive in your MacBook in 2012? People were still using these things with those iPod hard drives when the Retina MacBook Pro came out. They were not built to last. These were not long-lasting computers. You can still use a 10-year-old MacBook Air today, right? You could not use this thing for anywhere near that kind of length. That's one of the areas where Apple has improved the most. They might not be putting out as many like crazy innovation after innovation, new design, new technologies and stuff. They might not be doing that every single year now. But look me in the eye right now and tell me that 10 years ago, you could use a 10-year-old Mac, right? In 2010, there's no way that you were, for any sort of professional task, anything more than just minimal basic stuff, could you imagine using a 2000 like PowerBook or a iBook in 2010? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine using a G3 clamshell in 2010? That was already an antique. Whereas now, 2010 Mac Pro, you could edit 4K video on that. 2010 MacBook Air, you can still use those things. 2010 MacBook Pro, heck yeah, I've got like 3 of them. Totally doable. That's where Apple has made, they might not have as many crazy innovations back to back, but that stuff lasts. A 6-year-old MacBook Pro is nothing, right? You look at a 2014, 2013 Retina 15-inch, people still use those for video editing. In 2013, which was 7 years ago, that was exactly halfway between where we are now and the original 2006 MacBook Pro. In 2013, the original MacBook Pro was obsolete. In 2020, the 2013 MacBook Pro, totally fine. So that's an interesting dynamic.
We announced the most powerful Mac we've ever made, the new Mac Pro.
Oh, they did
8 processors across the board.
This was the 3-comma one.
It's a screamer. It's the fastest Mac we've ever
That's
made.
not far off. Those
Today,
things are still pretty decent.
Time capsule, companion product to Time Machine.
I forgot that they did the 2008 Mac Pro.
iPhone and the iPod Touch, bundling
iPod Touch
5
as well.
new apps on the iPod Touch as well.
5 new apps. Ooh.
iTunes Movie Rentals, a whole new way to enjoy movies on your computers, on your iPods, on your iPhone, and a completely reinvented Apple TV where you can order movies right on your widescreen TV, standard, DVD quality, or high def. Unbelievable. And the MacBook Air. All of this in the first 2 weeks. And we got 50 more weeks to go. So we're pretty excited. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is what we have to share with you today. Thank you so much for coming. You'll get a chance to see all of these new products in the booth.
Alrighty, so there you have it. That is the original MacBook Air. Now, this was an enjoyable stream, you guys. I had a lot of fun here. It's often challenging when you're looking at first generation Apple products, and I think I might actually make a video about this, sort of a video essay of sorts. The thing that's crazy is that with first gen Apple products, almost all of them are not very good. They're not particularly outstanding in terms of value or features or reliability, but that's not to say that they shouldn't be released, because you have to start somewhere, right? The MacBook Air, Apple might not have necessarily known that it was not going to really cut the mustard, but they needed to get that product out there, get awareness, get feedback. So it does kind of make you wonder, are they bad or are they revolutionary? It's kind of hard to tell, especially with the MacBook Air, because that one's really controversial. Was the original MacBook Air terrible and shouldn't have existed, or was it a first step that led to a really amazing product? The MacBook Air has been unbelievably popular. How much of that is due to this? I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments here for a couple minutes. We're going to wrap up this stream pretty soon. Someone asked what Keynote is next. Haven't decided. I think we might do the tapered edge iMac. That could be a good one. There might be a new iMac coming soon, hopefully. So we could do that one. A little bit more modern. By modern, 8 years old. Gosh, it's crazy that 2012 is 8 years ago. It's unbelievable. But yeah, the moral of the story here, I guess, are first generation products bad? Should they not exist? Should you, and obviously there has to be a first generation somewhere, but should Apple have waited until 2010 to release this? Should they have waited on better processors, waited on flash storage, tried to improve the technology before they went to market? Or did they need to, back in the day, release something? Because keep in mind, Apple wasn't, the most wealthy company in the world in 2008. So maybe they needed to get something out there to make all of the R&D worthwhile. And then, you've got the moral aspect of it. Like, is it wrong to sell people unfinished technology? That's something that you have to wonder with modern stuff, like the foldable phones, the Galaxy Fold. Obviously, there's been a lot of problems with that. Is it fair to sell people technology that you haven't finished yet? People are pointing out the first generation Apple Watch. That's another great example. When the Apple Watch was announced in 2014 at the September keynote, that was not a finished product. They did not have a marketable product at the time. They were basically doing a pre-order scenario, like a lot of video game companies do. They're not done with development, but they're pushing their product, building the hype train, and then it doesn't quite live up to expectations. So, yeah, it's definitely an argument. I'm not sure that there's a clear answer to it. I'm not sure that you can kind of definitively point one way or another and say, well, the first generation iPhone, iPad, MacBook Air, MacBook Pro too, if we're being honest, and Apple Watch should all have not existed. You can't really say that they did nothing, I guess. I don't know. It's definitely interesting. So, that'll do it for this stream. Thank you guys all for tuning in. We had about 500 500 concurrent viewers, which was very impressive. So thank you all for joining. As far as people that are currently here wondering if they're going to be able to watch this after the fact, I'm hoping that you will. I'm hoping that it will be able to, I'm going to try to make an unlisted playlist and you'll be able to click through on the channel and find that. But we might have some issues with copyright. I don't want to risk a copyright strike. If that happens, then I'm not going to make any promises that this will be available. But I'll try my best. I'll keep you guys posted. Follow me on Twitter for any updates. That's where I'll post if I'm able to get it all to work. So head over to @LukeMiani on Twitter. Give me a follow over there if you want to stay updated. And with that, I will see you all in the next video or live